You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers. Welcome to Java OffHeap episode 54. Hey everyone, this is our second episode with live video for those who don't know. So you can actually see our awesome faces. My name is Freddie Gime. I'm one of your co-hosts here at Java OffHeap. I'm one of the principal engineers at Expedia, speaker, author, used to be a conference presenter, but all conferences are essentially not running anymore for this year. And I'm here with my usual suspects and a guest. So,
All right, Bob Paulin, independent consultant from Chicago. Apache Software Foundation member, Java champion, CJUG executive board chair.
I'm Josh Juno. I'm a Java developer and database admin by day, author and open source contributor by night, Java champion, Apache NetBeans committer, CJUG board member, and help out with the open source initiative, Jakarta EE ambassadors member, and I'm involved with the JCP and the Eclipse EE4J projects.
Michael Manella, member of the engineering team for the Spring Frameworks, author, speaker at virtual conferences this year. JBatch committer, Java champion, CJUG board member, et cetera, curmudgeon at large.
Cool. And I'm Cedric Hurst. I write software for money. And I also run a consulting firm called Spantry here in Chicago. We do a lot of fun projects, mostly helping people make decisions with data. Nowadays, I'm writing a lot of Kotlin, but also Python, TypeScript, a little bit of Go, a little bit of Rust, kind of all over the place. And really excited to be a part of this podcast. So thanks for letting me join.
No, of course. Anytime, Cedric.
Yeah.
No, actually, you've been on our podcast a couple of times ago.
Yeah, I remember a long discussion about AWS Elasticsearch at some point. I think I was on for some other random reason once. So yeah, it's always a lot of fun.
That's fun.
I think the 12-factor microservice talk. So
that
we invite
familiar.
Cedric whenever we talk about anything cool. So
Yes.
Well, you know.
It's like we're trying to keep up. It's like, yeah, just bring Cedric. He'll talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right.
Yeah. No. Before we dive in, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Datadog. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 400 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environment and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. Start your free Datadog trial today. Listeners of this podcast will receive a free t-shirt once you install the agent and create one dashboard. Visit javaoffheap.com/Datadog. Again, the URL is javaoffheap.com/Datadog to get started. So please give them a check. They are not just that they're sponsored for our podcast, they make sure that our mics are recording and our video cameras are still show our faces, but their product is actually a great product to actually try out. So give it a shot.
Do we have a Datadog agent for our microphones and all that stuff? Because that would be pretty neat. Like
what do you mean?
Like dashboard, like a dashboard to track like who's speaking when and that sort of thing. That would be.
Oh, we could do something like that, right?
Let's talk to Jasmine about that.
Yeah, that would be kind of fun.
Yeah. Network latency, all those graphs. We can.
Yeah. But so give them a shot. All right. Well, we got a full agenda. A funny note is we were victims of Murphy's Law. Because Bob was like before joining it, there was a funny story. Like Bob was like, "Oh, we should start sharp," 1 hour ago.
Yeah.
And then Bob's computer decided that it ain't happening today. I needed to install all the world.
The best irony of this is look what shirt I'm wearing.
Yeah.
For
Perfect.
those who can't see it, he's wearing a blue screen of death shirt. Oh Lord!
But what's great about that, he also has a virtual background, so it disappeared as he was trying to
It
feature
did.
the show.
Yeah, it's a real sec fault.
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
it's supposed to be.
It's a blip in the matrix.
Yep.
But we're here. We have a full agenda for everybody tonight, so it should be a good episode. Really full agenda. I mean, I've actually was shocked putting it together. It started off with like 3 items on it, and then when I got through all of the stuff we were chatting about in Slack, it bulked up.
Yeah,
I'm busy.
Yeah, no, it's been a very eventful.
Everyone's
very
working
eventful
from
month.
home. They're not going out. They're just like pushing open source code.
Work.
And, yeah.
Yep.
Like introspecting on the racial history of the last 400 years in the country. It's been it's been a productive time.
Yeah. No, I think that one of the items that we have is, and I think it's important to like sort of like highlight, like for all of us, for the movements that are happening here in the United States more than anything else, where we're based, we do believe a lot in support Black Lives Matter. So that's a position that we all have. And that's something that we are going to explore a little bit on this podcast, but for those who we feel that it's important enough just to stress out that that's where we land. And, we love technology. We try to be, mostly technology and fun as much as we can. But I think this is important enough for everybody to know that we're behind the movement and we're behind the cause.
Thank you. Right on.
All right. Let's dive into the agenda since it's jam-packed full of news. The first one, Oracle open sources coherence. Mike, you wrote this, right?
Nope.
No, I think I threw that one in. It was just one of those things that it kind of came out of the blue. So those that aren't familiar with coherence are probably folks that haven't been doing or are maybe newer to Java, because coherence was one of the very early data grids that came out on the JVM and eventually got acquired by Oracle. And they've now open source. I think it started off as Tangasol. I think it was
the vendor. Yeah.
Was the vendor. And then through acquisition became an Oracle product. So really interesting just to see some of the things that are out there on their open source projects. So they did license it with their kind of the Oracle. I think it's like a universal permissive license, I think is the Oracle version of the Apache license. So it is, the community edition is free and open source. Just kind of interesting to think about a data grid that's probably been around for 20 years on the JVM now available as open source. So something to check out.
What are the different, so people know, what are the different, I guess, products that are similar to coherence?
Data grids are all over the place.
Yeah.
Now,
so you'll see Redis used in a data grid capacity pretty often.
Redis?
You could do a lot of data grid type stuff with Redis, and there's libraries that will provide some data grid like services on top of the Redis primitives as well.
I think the closer comparisons are Hazelcast.
Okay.
Those are kind of the
JVM,
standard,
Grid Gain, or Apache Ignite.
Yeah.
The list goes on.
Yeah, Gemfire, Apache Geo.
Yeah.
What was that one that was off? Off process data memory in memory data grid, you had
Infinite Cache or something, or
a lot of them
Infinispace or whatever that was a while ago.
Yeah, but a lot of them have that.
Finispan.
Yeah.
Is that the way? Yeah, I remember they had one that was free, and then they used their name for they also have a commercial one.
Yeah, I think that's at Red Hat via JBoss. I think
this group of products was probably one of the most vocal people against the unsafe thing.
Really?
Because these are all mucking with memory at a much lower level than the JVM normally does. So this group of products was one of the more vocal groups that were concerned about taking that away.
Yeah. That's I can see that. Wow.
Can people use coherence like outside the JVM? Or is it like something that has like tight coupling? Well, I'm looking at the website. They have C++ and .NET clients, so I'm assuming an open.
They do.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
So wow. Okay. So it's interesting.
Yeah, kind of out of left field, but joining the club of open source data grids, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. So certainly talked about it a lot, and I know we have a packed agenda. So
I know. No, you know what? We should cover it on the Java Pub House. So maybe that's what we do. Invite this crowd over there. All right. So the next one, Shenandoah. I think I don't know if I was the one who put this one in.
I think you did, Freddie. Yeah.
Yep. Shenandoah backport to Java 11. So it's interesting because essentially there's a big discussion on the OpenJDK mailing list where they're trying to essentially add this new garbage collector, Shenandoah, which is a Red Hat. I think Red Hat is the one who was leading the charge on it. And they're trying to backport it to OpenJDK 11. And there's been a lot of back and forth between Guild and some folks from the Red Hat community. And in this particular case, we'll put it on the show notes. What Gil is arguing for is that introducing a new garbage collector, while it's great as a feature, introducing it into a long-term stable release is not a good idea. And not necessarily on the what he's worried about, not necessarily downstream. Downstream people do what they want to do, meaning like Red Hat can take OpenJDK code and add their own thing to it. Azul takes OpenJDK code and adds his own thing. But he's arguing that putting it upstream means that everybody who's downstream from OpenJDK must then support it and must deal with the risks of having a new garbage collector added to the upstream project. So, and
to be clear, he's not even saying it's about the fact that it's something as low level as a garbage collector. He's pointing out that it's really about a major feature should not be added retroactively to an LTS.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because
the line there was drawn. The committee moved on. Like it's the whole reason we progress with versions. So
no, and I think that is a very fair the interesting part is that at least when you are an end user, and I guess I don't know if I'm like a spoiled end user, right? Like I'm a consumer of the OpenJDK. Like I don't necessarily work to add to it, right? And as a consumer of OpenJDK, I do see the value of not messing with my version. like I know that if there is something that is really, really amazing, it will warrant for me to say, okay, fine, I'm going to go off the LTS and I'm going to try 12, 13, 14, wherever that is, right? Yeah. And in this particular case, it's not even that. I can actually go to Red Hat 11 and then just use that. Like if I really wanted to use, so I tend to agree with Gil in why do I don't think the community wants something, even though like that I can get many other ways than you publishing upstream.
Yeah.
This feels like they're not getting the adoption they want, so they're looking to backdoor it into other ways.
Yeah.
Which just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, Java has frequent releases so that we can
for this reason, right?
Exactly. So you don't have to. If we had the 3 or 5 year release cycles that Java used to have, this might, and it might is still a very strong word here. This might be a different conversation. I doubt it would end differently, but it'd probably get more entertainment. The fact that we get 6 month releases, and also we've got an LTS coming up, so it's not even like. It's not even like
it does take like 1 year or two. I'll say to that though, like it will take after an LTS is released, it does take a year or two before people really adopt it, just because things do break. Not necessarily in the LTS.
Not disagreeing with that, but again, we've got an LTS coming. It's not like they just released 11.
Yeah.
And now he's got to wait years. I mean, it's next year. It's the next LTS.
Yeah.
And people wanted to use it. There are quite a few. I mean, it goes all the way back to JDK 8. There's support for it. You can get it. You can use it if you want to. So,
I mean, if I were a database vendor that relied on the JVM, I would be kind of terrified of this being weaved into Java 11. I remember like even the G1 garbage collector, which was relatively stable, would cause like both Neo4j and Elasticsearch to segfault for like the first year of its release after it was already like GA'd. Like there are a lot of databases specifically that rely on very specific garbage collection behavior. And like, if they all of a sudden like have to support their customers running on this, like
because it's part of the 8, right? Like that's interesting. You're forcing a database vendor or like anyone else that says, I fully support 8 to say, oh, now I need to check on Shenandoah to make sure that Shenandoah works.
The coherence team is going to have to,
8
exactly.
or 11,
Well, that was actually, it no longer becomes like a unified platform. Like the coherence team is going to have to go in and make sure that their stuff works with Shenandoah too. And like I could see like part of the issue being like there's certain assumptions about the addressable heap size that's probably baked into a lot of these things that Shenandoah is as I understand it, intentionally trying to bust. So you could like get, heap sizes up to the 2 terabyte.
Yeah. So that's
that seems.
No, and the other interesting part is that like on the thread, which is public. So it is one of the quotes that Gil takes out. Essentially quotes out is like the people that are replying. It says you also know that this is not the position taken by the whole community, meaning like the whole community supports backporting Shenandoah to or moving Shenandoah to upstream JDK 11. But Gil is making the claim that the community of OpenJDK is not the committers, is the users of OpenJDK. And he is claiming that the users of OpenJDK, which I guess on this sample size that we have here, I think we're all in agreement that we don't want that kind of rock the boat behavior of backporting a new garbage collector back into upstream. Like if I'm going to get it on my next adopt OpenJDK build, which is my vanilla build, it is something that you get a little bit freaked out because
I'm taking those for security updates. I'm taking those for things that are critical bug fixes, things that are probably already breaking my code that they're fixing. I think the argument that the committer group is trying to make is, well, it's behind a feature toggle and we can protect from it. And I know feature toggling has become very popular in application software to say, hey, we can just keep shipping. But when you're looking at the foundational stuff, like the JVM, I think it's a tough argument.
This is a garbage collector.
Yeah, but it's also like, okay, so the applications in which you'd use Shenandoah, from what I would imagine, is probably like you have some very specific memory intensive. But you're deploying that sort of in an isolated container. So it's, I would understand, like, let's say we were in the days of WebSphere, right? And like the JVM that you choose for running like one application is the JVM that you also have to choose for like 500. But I don't know what we're calling it now, like cloud native service. In this day and age of cloud native services, like no, we can cherry pick like JDK 8 for this, JDK 11 for this, Red Hat JDK for that, and there's really there's very little impact
friction
other
that,
than I mean like the one piece is like obviously now your sysadmins have to learn like the unique properties of various JDKs and garbage collectors and configuration settings, but just adding this garbage collector to the core upstream JDK would produce that burden for everyone, even if they don't need those features.
No, I tend to agree. And I think there is enough space to you get the benefits without having to subject everybody else to the pain. Again, small data point, in this sample group of 5.
Unanimous.
That's it. We're done. Java OffHeap rules all decisions on the Java platform from now on.
No, we support Gil for president.
I mean, it is a public list. Dude, I don't know. Can guests post?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if we are unanimous, we hardly ever agree on anything. So
yeah. So true. Like there's point and counterpoint, but on this one here is like, we agree with Gil. He's fighting for the users. That was his Twitter feed, Twitter comment on that. So, but we'll put it on the show notes so you can read the little drama or little novella really back and forth that is going on. Next one. Microprofile looking to form a working group.
Yep. No, I added that one. It's another thing on the public list for the micro profile. We can include a link in the show notes. It looks like the micro profile is looking to build an official working group within the Eclipse Foundation. Just something for folks to take a look at. I know they're drafting their bylaws for how the working group's going to operate, how members are going to join. So interested community members, companies, jugs, something to take a look at and see if it's something that you're interested in. I mean, I know there's currently some debate in the community about whether microprofile will stay independent or end up joining the Jakarta EE. It does seem like a number of the members are trying to stay independent. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
What's the motive for that? What's the motive to keep independent?
So I think on previous shows, I've even thought, well, you could just make it a profile within the Jakarta EE.
Yeah.
I think
when they moved over from Oracle, Jakarta, like that was one of the things that Mike talked about is like, creating profiles should be easy. It should, like that should be that was the expected mechanism to handle these kinds of things. Right.
And I think the concern is actually something we have talked about on the show before, which is how Jakarta EE governance works. If you look at the governing board, well, you got a lot of big companies that paid a good amount of money to get on that board. If you look at the micro profile, it's a little bit, I would say, more representative of what the community looks like. You're not looking at a large down payment to get on the board of micro profile. At least, if you look at the draft that they're currently working through, then there's no promise that that's what's going to be the end state. But I guess, my concern would be around whether having that kind of governance structure turns Jakarta EE back into more like the JCP.
Yeah, no, I think it's
sorry, go ahead, Freddie.
What I was going to do is like a little bit of a recap for those who don't know what these are, right? Like Jakarta EE is started like Java EE, right? Like this was essentially the big Java EE 7 and Java EE 8 that were under Oracle, and this actually started. Josh wrote a lot about this. Essentially saying, look, nobody's contributing to the Java EE spec, and there was a real point in time where we covered this on this podcast actually, where we thought, okay, Java EE in the eyes of Oracle is dead. They're not contributing anymore. They're not doing anything. They're not advancing any of the projects. They're not making any commits. And then Microprofile came out of sort of like that need of like, we want to move this forward. We don't know what's going to happen with Java EE. So let's create that. And they sort of not quite fork because you cannot fork, but they decided these are sort of like the specs that we want, and this is sort of like the standard that we want for somebody who says that they're going to support microprofile. Now, in terms of what it is essentially a collection of both Jakarta EE, Java EE now known as Jakarta EE, and microprofile is a collection of JSRs saying you must implement or support these JSRs, and a lot of the JSRs are things that we actually use every day, like from JSON for some of them, like for data persistence, for essentially like all these, I guess for dependency injection, for REST. A lot of it is like REST definition. So when you do like add post or add get, you're actually using a microprofile supported or actually Java EE supported spec. So then what happened is Oracle decided to essentially free the code and essentially donate it to the Eclipse Foundation. And they donated everything except the name. So
and
you
can packs and the packs. It's not quite that carte blanche, but yeah.
But yeah, so they cannot call it Java EE if it's going to live in Eclipse. So they decided to call it Jakarta EE. So the interesting story is that what we thought it was going to die, it didn't die. It took a new breath of life within the Eclipse Foundation, and Mike Milikovich is like a savior on that. So now we actually have Jakarta EE, but we have sort of like this other spec that is, they overlap a lot. I have to say that, like they are essentially trying to define the same thing. How enterprise, what is the JSRs or the features that an enterprise, ready sort of container or combination of containers really must support to say I am Java EE, Jakarta EE compatible or microprofile compatible. So that's where we stand in today.
But
Two things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Cedric.
No, please. You're more.
I was going to say. So, thinking back to previous conversations we've had about the JCP and Jakarta, and that I remember a very interesting point at a DevNexus recording where it was called out that there was flat out competition between the JCP and the Eclipse Foundation.
Yes.
Heather Van Kura said that it was a competitive landscape. She admitted it. And when I'm reading through this thread of stuff, I would think, is this now a three-way battle? Like, is the intent here to have a three-pronged, or is that where this is headed? Is the idea of specs in three different buckets: the JCP, the Jakarta, or microprofile? That's one. Number two,
I mean,
it's interesting that the direction the governance model for microprofile is going, given that it's intended to stay with the Eclipse Foundation, and I could be wrong in this, but I was pretty sure that the Eclipse Foundation had a pretty heavy input on the governance model for Jakarta. And so, Bob, to your point earlier about how it's heavy hitters, it's pay to play, it'll be interesting to see how this flow, like whether this will influence Jakarta going forward.
I agree.
Under the same roof, like Eclipse like that.
I agree. It will be interesting to see.
And I guess like what is the nature of competition with something like this, right? Like I'm reminded of like 10, 15 years ago when like it was sort of like an identity politics issue, which Linux distribution that you used. And like whether you were Debian or whether you were SUSE or something like that, like like they agreed on many standards, right? So like the whole POSIX use tool chain, like, but they had different package managers and that sort of thing. And if you were Gentoo, like you were a little bit edgier, but Gentoo was also moving really fast and was highly customizable. So even though like 80% of the tool chain was the same, I actually think in this case, like the diversity of options can be a good thing. Like for me, like there's no chance in hell I'm ever going to be on Jakarta EE because what I'm interested in are like reactive streams. Like I could care less about JAX-RS, although I really loved it like 10 years ago, but like every API that I'm developing nowadays is in GraphQL. So like, I actually think that if there's like sort of three different ecosystems, all at a different level of aggression that are driving enterprise forward, that's actually the way to keep this alive. Like if we only had one Linux distribution like 15 years ago that like formed a whole bunch of very specific opinions about like the safety of like putting one thing in versus another, we would not see a thriving like Linux ecosystem on the server side like we're seeing right now, in my opinion.
It's interesting because like Linux is a weird story, right? Like the core kernel is the same. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is the kernel
the
in this case? Yeah. But I mean, like, where do you draw the line between kernel space and user space here? For me, like, I would say, like, the kernel is the JVM, right? And, like, a series of JDK services that are offered. And you can get more in the kernel, right? Like, you could get, like, the whole Jakarta EE thing as part of your kernel. But there are certain cases where, like, I may not actually want services in my kernel. I may want to move it to user space so that I have a lot more control and flexibility over when and how it gets introduced into certain processes. So I think that like that metaphor kind of holds true for even that piece of it.
Hey, Josh, I'm dying to know your opinion on this since you're also in Jakarta EE.
You're in both of them.
Sorry,
he is the kid that is going through the divorce.
I'm just kind of curious.
So here's the deal. for a long time had my nose down in Jakarta EE, Java EE, and that's all I did. I wanted to push Java EE along and work with Java EE specifications, standards. I think it's very important to have standards. And I still am very interested in moving Jakarta EE along. I use it every day. But the microprofile project does bring a different aspect to this. And I think that, listening to a talk that was given recently really did kind of open my eyes to the side of the funding where, yeah, it is kind of a pay to play if you go to the Jakarta EE working group as opposed to this working group. But the other aspect is the dynamic change that can come about in microprofile. I think the folks at microprofile really want to continue to have a more dynamic role in this. Yeah. And they want to be able to change code and they want to be able to release more often. And I know that with Jakarta EE, it's supposed to be code first, but it's still a standard. And this microprofile is a standard as well, but it's also more of a dynamic standard that can change more often. And it also has code above and beyond those specs, right? So what do we have? JSON, JSON P.
Or JSON P, yeah.
That's part of microprofile, I believe. And, they have gone even steps further where they've got JWT as part of microprofile. They've got their own specifications that they've kind of off. And so if you ask me, I think it's kind of worth keeping separate just for that reason. You can move more dynamically. And if Jakarta EE wants to then take parts of microprofile or even the microprofile, as a whole, as its own, as a profile, or take parts of it in, I think that's fine, but it should probably remain separate so they can move at a separate pace.
Yeah. On the standards note, also, I'd be curious on your take about so in my mind, when I'm playing an architectural role now, there's a consideration for internal standards being things that are standard on the JVM versus external standards, which is how the hell am I going to get my JVM application to talk to this service that we wrote in Rust or the Node GraphQL API? And I think, the spirit of microprofile seems to resonate more with people that value external standards, where Jakarta is going to take forever probably to get to a GraphQL specification as part of its core. Same for open tracing, same for reactive stream, same for gRPC support. And those are all things that allow JVM-based applications to play with other language ecosystems, with cloud native architectures and that sort of thing. And so I think if you almost look at each of those different groups as sort of valuing different trade-offs, internal versus external standards, conservative sort of long cycles of review versus move fast and break stuff, there's a home for every developer that's doing JVM on something like that. And then there's also the no standards crowd of we're just going to do what Spring does or what Micronaut does. And
that is the interesting part. I think in my day-to-day line of work, I don't have to worry too much about if I need to do something that is Jakarta EE compatible or even microprofile compatible. We tend to, in the world that I live in, is just you take what you need and then move on. Yeah. If it happens to be Spring today, then you do that. If it happens to be something on GraalVM, then you take that. And then if sometimes you have to deal with add guest and add post because it's something that is 5 years old or 10 years old, then you just do that. It's crazy because just for the same reason, because containerization and essentially the ability for you to not have to depend on shared infrastructure for deploying that new service and the encouragement of microservice architecture to say create a service for when you need it. It's sort of like weakens the argument that you have to have one of these two or you have to dump one of the two.
I mean, I guess
just
like
wanted to.
yeah.
I'm sorry, Cedric. Go ahead.
No. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say for Michael, you had asked about the competition between these three, and I really don't look at it as competition. Now, if I was coming in from an outside point of view and looking at it from somebody who is just getting into Java Enterprise, that may be different. They may think, well, you've got microprofile or you've got Jakarta EE. But knowing about these projects and, the Jakarta EE platform, they use similar code and, much the same specifications in some cases. And I think it's more of a collaborative effort, really.
Yeah.
So to be honest, I wouldn't have even considered them competing until Heather said that she viewed the JCP as a direct competitor to Jakarta.
Well,
but
that would not have even crossed my mind.
The foundation, right? Like
right.
you can expect either way.
Like I sort of. Is it fair to say there's such a thing as like technical competition and marketing competition, and like what we're talking about now is like marketing competition, like who's going to win the hearts and minds and like brand recognition and adoption, more so than like who's actually going to control the future of enterprise Java from a technical standpoint? Like there's no
that big of a difference.
Well, I mean, I guess like
if you don't get adoption, you don't control that mindshare, right?
Well, but they're all so like there is a union of all technologies. It's not like you have a situation where like one standard is saying like we're going to do GraphQL services or reactive services this way, and you have another standard saying, oh, we're actually going to solve the same problem. It's not like Spring versus Struts, in my opinion, where you have like two competing standards to solve the same problem. It's just that we're saying like each of these standards is addressing a different set of problems for a slightly different demographic of customers. And that to me is more of a marketing concern. Marketing is about bundling a set of products or services together in a way that produces a unique value proposition. But like no one is saying like, in order for microprofile to succeed, that means that this standard that's being developed under Jakarta, like as an individual component needs to be fail.
Replaced.
Has to fail.
Yeah.
And I do agree that it's not a
either or.
It's not a zero sum game. It's
not like Macintosh versus Windows, right? Like that's like true competition where it's zero sum, winner take all. Right. Yeah.
And I think as that comment's probably about a year old, I guess from the competitive standpoint, I haven't really seen it play out where JCP and Eclipse are competing. It seems like the Java EE microprofiles type specifications are going to Eclipse. JCP is mostly looking at standard Java as their specifications. So I mean, she did say it. Haven't seen it play out in the wild yet. In my view,
yeah, completely agree there.
But Heather she's like a community, like she's a contributor to the code base, but her role is more as like a community.
She's a JCP chair.
Yeah, she's
but I mean, JCP. I mean, she's
but I mean that's like also like that has a bit of an ambassadorship sort of role to it as well, more so than like. I didn't listen to the episode, unfortunately, but like I would imagine that she just
shame.
I had stuff going on. I will. All right.
Cedric's done. Cedric's been nice talking to you.
All right. I'm recording this, so it's all.
He has a random. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
I could just video mute and be silent though if you want.
All right. Next one. Let's go to them real quick because like we have so much to cover. Jakarta EE Platform 9 milestone. I guess it's just a news item. That's you, Josh, right?
Yep. I'll make this quick. The Jakarta EE 9 milestone is now available, and this is basically going to be more of a tooling release, and basically it includes the namespace change from JavaX to Jakarta, and basically it's going to deprecate a couple of things, but nothing that was mainstream and used often by anyone. So the main brunt of this release is going to be geared towards the namespace changes, specification documents, Michael. individual specifications included in the scope of Jakarta EE9 full profile and web profile should convert the documents over to the Eclipse Foundation here. Backwards compatibility, they're not going to impose any backwards compatibility for this release. Java SE, it has to compile to Java SE8, but they must also certify compatibility with Java SE11. So I'm not going to go down the list of all the specs, but go check it out. And I think the release is going to be happening around September.
Cool.
The milestone's on now, but the full final release will be
GA.
September. Yeah, GA.
All right. Next one is the Jakarta EE Developer Survey is released. So I remember when they were collecting the information, and the actual survey is released now. So we'll put it in the show notes. Anything interesting on the release?
A lot of people are using Quarkus. And
I was surprised.
Yeah.
I was surprised about that one.
Well, I was really disappointed in this survey.
There's the shade of it all.
Yeah. So to be transparent, I mean, when you compare this year's to last year's, this is really not looking for trends between these two is looking for a needle in the
tea leaves.
Exactly. These are two apples and oranges surveys. I mean, when you look at the roles and the who is surveyed by this, it's not even close. I mean, 35% of this survey's respondents identified themselves as junior developers.
Okay, so
how many people do you know that have been in the industry more than about 6 months consider themselves junior developers?
So let's
and this is self-identified.
Let's explain the anger of Michael, just because people might not be able to see this just yet, and they just hear it. In the survey,
pretty bright red.
So the thing is that the microprofile survey, the key takeaways, and it's in big bold letters, was claiming that Spring and Spring Boot's share declined by 13% as the leading framework for building cloud-native applications. It says from 57% in 2019 to 44% in 2020. And then it's essentially showing like the Spring is 44% adoption, Jakarta EE is 35, Eclipse microprofile is 29, Quarkus is 60%, which I'm weirded out by.
So yeah. I mean, it's 16%. Red Hat didn't even start supporting it until after the survey happened. Like they would not support Quarkus commercially until after the survey was given.
I kind of want to I kind of want to know where these people work. Like,
thank you.
16% Quarkus adoption, but then also like if you scroll down,
well, half of them work. Yeah, half of the work at companies less than 100 people.
But then like you also have like 27% Docker Swarm adoption, which is like dead. It's like dead.
Yeah,
like no one like Docker doesn't use it anymore.
No,
like that means that there is a company out there that is using both Quarkus and Docker Swarm. Like just statistically speaking, there's over 50% likelihood there's an intersection there. Like who? Where is that company? And do they need consultants?
I mean, and again, like to be fair, it's always very hard. This was a Jakarta. It was a Jakarta-led survey, right? Like it wasn't independently conducted, and not that that is wrong in itself. It's just that there is a lot of self-selection bias, right? Like you happen to listen to, if you're subscribed to the Jakarta EE Twitter feed, you're probably a Jakarta EE user.
I mean, the way I look at this, and to be in all fairness, I expect a report like this from Oracle. I did not expect a report like this from Eclipse.
Yeah,
I expected Eclipse to do better from a neutral to be from a neutral ground.
Yeah,
that's my big objection to this report is that I expected Eclipse to I expected more of Eclipse.
It feels like Eclipse marketing fluff.
100%.
A lot of it is shown to highlight Eclipse specific projects, and again, they have an incentive to do that. But again, for a not-for-profit, something that's for the benefit of the community, I would have liked a little bit better sampling, a little bit more of a maybe scientific sampling of the Java user community if you're going to promote these as facts.
It seems like the dimensioning is incorrect because like it's dimensioning per head and not per organization. So like you have 50% of people that responded to the survey that work in a company of less than 100 people. Like how many of those people work in the same company of less than 100 people? Like was
That's
there
true.
It was the same company.
engineering team of like 40
company.
people that are like Quarkus and Mesos, that's us, you know, and like that seems like that would tip the scales when really it's about like, well, how many places of work, how many engineering teams are using these technologies? It's to do a more apples to apples thing.
See, maybe we should do a survey. So
We
there's
should.
an idea. There's,
we
have enough people
opening-
here to keep us honest.
Docker Swarm requires 20 people to support it. So
Yeah, right.
that's-
No, seriously, that thing was so bad when I tried. I mean, I'm sorry, Docker, but it was bad.
What it was trying to do. It
was great.
What it was trying to do is like ease the transition of getting things running in the cloud by basically taking the Docker Compose format, which was really solid for local development, and then applying it on a cluster, which is a great sort of philosophical vision. But the problem is that like how you orchestrate things on a cluster are very different from how you would orchestrate things on your MacBook.
I think it was just execution, really. Like for me, it was that every minor release they introduced something that completely broke what was before there, and to stitch up like a Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, it's not an easy thing to do. You have to be very careful how you lay out your networks, how you orchestrate the different containers, so that they broke that every time, which means that I have to spend 2 days trying to upgrade everything. Yeah, that's like there's Kubernetes now, so you can move on.
I mean it's interesting because actually like it was Ken Sipe when he worked at Mesosphere. He gave a talk at Strangeloop and he was talking about how cloud platforms and newer technologies, like their goal is to push complexity as far down the stack as possible. And that was the vision of Mesos. And it was very much the vision of Kubernetes as well. Is like you deal with all the network stuff at the cloud provider level. You make that something that's like kind of baked into the framework so that you don't have to think about it other than like writing your Kubernetes
I want to connect
YAMLs.
over there.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that like Docker Swarm did not push the complexity down far enough. Like they pushed the complexity down some, but there's all this other complexity that's now just exotic and obscure and not well known. And I think that was tricky. They were trying to build a simple product for a complex problem space.
Yeah, and I think that's so. What we'll do is we'll put the survey out there. I think that it does feel that way. Again, it's a Jakarta EE survey with a very Jakarta EE story to tell. So I will take it with a grain of salt. Still, like there's insights in there, but
Did they ask about programming languages at some point? Like it seems like kind of a big thing to ask about. Like, are you Kotlin? Are you
as long as it's Java?
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's someone doing some Spring Boot with like Kotlin or Scala.
There's a lot of people doing Kotlin Spring Boot stuff.
Yeah, I would actually say like more teams that are like adopting Spring Boot now are probably doing it with a non-Java language.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Next one. Adopt OpenJDK is going to move to Eclipse.
Yes. This is the one I put in. And again, another one that I guess I didn't see coming, and maybe I should have. I mean, I know there's a number of organizations that were involved with Adopt, and I'm sure we'll still likely be involved in Adopt, but it looks like it is moving under the Eclipse umbrella. And I know we've already talked a ton about Eclipse, so I guess my concern there is just we're seeing an overall consolidation of a lot of things under a single foundation, which in my opinion makes me a little bit nervous. I kind of liked Adopt as this independent organization that was distributing the JDK, had their own suite of tests, had their own build process. They were independent of almost the entire vendor landscape. And I feel this move to Eclipse kind of pulls them a little bit away from that.
Is it a sustainability issue though? Like it almost seems like an acqui-hire of like, hey, this is actually becoming a drag on our personal time and it's unsustainable. So we're going to move it to an organization with a larger infrastructure and, headcount.
Could be. No, I think,
Yeah.
I don't.
That usually is a way
to
for open source to die, isn't
Dump?
it?
Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole dump model of open source. Like, we can't manage it. We don't need it anymore. So let's toss it. Let's open source it and let the community take care of it. And well,
Quote,
Well, but
wait.
I mean, in this
that's
particular
not,
case,
that doesn't feel like this. This feels. It wouldn't surprise me if Eclipse flat out asked for it.
Yeah, but I mean, like it's a lateral move between providers, so I'd liken it more to like Redis certainly didn't die when it like landed in the VMware umbrellas. Aside from a story that we're going to cover in a minute, but like this actually seems more like a lateral move because it wasn't already open source. It's just now open source under a different umbrella.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, I agree with Bob that it feels like a consolidation. It feels like Eclipse is actually actively pursuing a more cohesive Java JVM story.
Yeah. Well, the name behind Eclipse is pretty apropos of that. Like it was like meant to be like we are eclipsing Sun Microsystems, and so now
it's like it only took 20 years.
Yeah, it only took 20 years and an acquisition by Oracle. And,
yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I guess because like the leads of the adopt, right? Like we're talking about like the London Java community, Martin Berber, Kip Pepperdine, a lot of like those folks were essentially acquired by Microsoft, right? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, and they probably will have been given the cycles to work on this on Microsoft. So it's interesting, yeah. That you might be right. Like maybe Eclipse asked for it, and now it wants to land over there. So
yeah, we'll see. I mean, they have OpenJ9 builds. I mean, OpenJ9 is with the Eclipse Foundation, so I mean, there's certainly synergies there. Again, just didn't see it coming, but maybe I'll start seeing this stuff coming because it seems like it's happening more frequently.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah. All right. The next one, Micronaut 2.0 is out.
That's hot stuff.
Yeah. So I put this one on there. I saw it the other day. Micronaut is another framework we haven't really talked about too much here for the enterprise or for microservices, but it is, kind of centering around movie. So other languages as well. But some of the big things in Micronaut 2.0 would be that there is a completely rewritten Micronaut CLI, uses Micronaut itself. And it's also, now they've got their own launch page, Micronaut Launch. It's a great tool for creating Micronaut applications. Also, JDK 14 and Groovy 3. Lots of performance tweaks. There's improved serverless support. So they're introducing support for writing applications that can be deployed to Google's upcoming Cloud Function support for Java. Also, they are working with Microsoft with the Azure function. So there's a Micronaut Azure function documentation that you can go and check out. What else? The Maven plugin has been created for Micronaut. There's support for HTTP2, servlet support, GraalVM improvements, Gradle improvements, and much more. So the one thing that you should note, though, is that there are a few key changes that everyone upgrading should understand. So if you're upgrading from a Micronaut 1 application to Micronaut 2, you'll have to check that out. Just something to be aware of.
Now, and for those who don't know, I guess Micronaut is essentially almost like I will consider it almost like a direct competitor to Spring, right? Like they implement a lot of the same sort of like APIs and Micronaut's story of fame, I think, was essentially when they were like one of the first frameworks to almost like not quite be Ground native, but that with the specific intent of being supported by Ground. So that is sort of like where they stand. So if you haven't picked a framework, you can check.
This is really where Grails evolved.
This is the same lead, and
right. So it was founded by the same people that founded Grails. It's even the approach from development from a CLI and all that kind of thing. It's a very Grails-esque style framework. It does have the quirks.
The AST and it
is the quirks. It's actually funny. You mentioned that they compete with Spring, but they have taken some of the code from Spring and brought into their code base.
That's right.
There's some Java doc in there with Jürgen's name in it. because they use some of that stuff, just some utility stuff, but it's kind of entertaining to see.
Yeah, but like Grails itself was like fully
what
wired.
you saw and you took it.
Like Grails was fully wired with Spring on the back.
Yeah, Grails was a wrapper on top of Spring.
Yeah,
it was the one project I used it on, it was maddening because I'm like, this would take me 5 minutes in Spring, but it's taking me forever to figure out how to do this in Grails.
So I think, and I guess like Micronaut is an attempt to remove the Spring bits and make it more like Drop Wizard like pretty like small, almost like Sinatra like. But yeah, it's cool. I like it. I've done a little bit of stuff with it, mostly like raw stuff, and but yeah, I would if anything, it's like more of a competitor to Spring Boot specifically, but it's, I would say, lighter and more opinionated than that.
That being said, the next topic, did I drop this one or did?
I think you did. Yeah.
Okay, so Micronaut Micronaut is a project that came out of OCI, or Object Computing. It's a consultancy, and they are starting up. Forming the Micronaut Foundation, and so this is a foundation that is essentially. Let me get the formation of the foundation reflects the growing need to balance the diverse range of interests for Micronaut community contributing organizations. And what was I'm looking for in the announcement? Micronaut Foundation oversees software roadmap and development, best practices, repository control, documentation support, and fundraising related to the open source framework. I read this as OCI is getting out of the Micronaut business.
No, I was on a call with OCI actually like a couple weeks ago. They're very much still in the Micronaut business, but I think this is a sign of maturity, in my opinion. Like I don't think that they're going to be dropping.
So why the foundation then?
Well, I think why not the foundation? Like look at the board members of the foundation. So at the top you have Graham Roche and Jeff Cott Brown, who are like the creators and work for OCI. But then you also have Ken Sipe, who I just mentioned like 10 minutes ago from Mesosphere, the push complexity down guy. You have Neil Ford. You have Venkat is on the board. Like, nice. I think like you generally establish a board or a foundation to get to avoid creating an echo chamber. Right. And so this is a way of more formally getting advice and guidance from people outside the lens of a specific vendor.
I could go along with that if these weren't individual people as opposed to, I mean, this board makes perfect sense, but you don't need a foundation to get these individuals involved, I would say.
There's probably money.
All these people are heavily involved. Sorry?
I would say you're also looking at financial structure too. I mean, if you're looking to make it more official.
OCI is committed to dedicate $2 million to it. Okay. And if you look at the OCI employees on here, that's probably their salaries for the course of those years. For sure, I would say 3 years tops. So that's no marketing. That is not a large investment, in my opinion, in this. Which is frankly the reason the fact that it's $2 million is one of the reasons I'm saying they're out.
But are there other players that might also be financing?
From a financial contribution, it doesn't say.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's also, so it's a foundation, which means it's probably a nonprofit. When you get to an open source project of a certain size, whether or not you're formally announcing a nonprofit foundation or whether you're just like sort of creating like a corporate like nonprofit structure around that, there are certainly like tax and accounting advantages of doing that. Otherwise, you end up having to like file for research and development credits every fiscal year. And like I could see actually like spinning this off actually being a good thing for their balance sheet without like divesting from investment in it. It separates like the services arm from the open source arm. And I mean, there's plenty of precedent for many organizations that do that. Mozilla Foundation versus Mozilla, the company, like they have a separate foundation for stuff that is not the core Firefox project.
Yeah, no, I think it's so maybe what it is like it's sort of like a bridge that they cross because of the maturity of Micronaut. The question is what kind of road they take it after that will be something to, I guess, watch out for, right? Like, is it just being there to wither, or is it something to like, this makes sense and we're going to bring more diversity into like the Micronaut, ecosystem. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, like OCI, Actually, I'll shut up about OCI. But like they would be like their bread and butter, like they're sort of like cash cow right now, as I understand it, is the Micronaut framework. Like that's what brings them prestige in business.
They're a consulting company, so that's
but I mean, like I wish that we had the resources to have acquired the Grails team after Pivotal shed it, and like I see the play there. I see the play that they're doing, and I think they would be shooting themselves in the foot by shedding Micronaut at this point.
I just see the conference attendance and submissions that have been accepted and whatnot, and I just see they made a big bang a year and a half, 2 years ago. I have not seen them keep up that that marketing push.
And you could say the same of Grails too. Like there was like a lot of excitement around Grails. Like our first like 5 major projects at Spantry were in Grails, and then like it just sort of tapered off as like other solutions came out. So Micronaut could totally follow the same trajectory. I don't think that's their intention at the moment though.
And if you look at it too, just to add this in there, it's probably one of the only frameworks for the enterprise or for microservices that centers around Groovy, right? So if you like Groovy, you're probably going to try and use Micronaut. Yeah,
although, I mean, internally, I see a lot more people, like at OCI, they seem to be more fans of Kotlin, to be honest. For new projects. Like what I've observed is that and this is based on like one anecdotal conversation with one anecdotal OCI team member, like they seem to be shifting legacy Grails projects into Micronaut using Groovy as the glue. But like, as far as I know, like Kotlin and Groovy are kind of first-class citizens on equal footing in the Micronaut ecosystem right now.
Okay. All right. Now, moving on to the meat, the stuff that we wanted to get like 45 minutes ago. All right. So who put this one in?
Trump suspending green cards?
Yeah.
I think, Bob, was that you?
It may have been me. Okay. No, I mean, it was certainly something in the news. And I mean, the tech implications of this is, again, a lot of green cards holders are in the tech industry. I know for one,
it's not just green cards, right?
Green cards, visas. A number of different programs that are basically fleshed out with immigrants. I know I work with a number of folks in that situation. So, I mean, the cancellation of programs like this is a big hit, I think, to the tech industry. I mean, the idea behind it from the Trump administration as well, it means that companies are going to have to rehire American workers. But I mean, these are workers that there are not set replacements for. These are skill sets that take time to build, and it's not plug and play. So the concern is naturally when these things start expiring and companies aren't able to renew and keep these people, not only the impact on their personal lives, but I mean, what are the companies going to do as well? I mean, they can't readily hire people to put in these positions.
Aside from the fact that it's like a super ridiculously like sort of isolationist and racist policy, like this is what Stephen Miller has been trying to do from the very beginning of the Trump administration, is just find a way to keep anyone from entering the country from the countries that they don't want immigrants. But it also like couldn't possibly come at a worse time as far as the impact that they're trying to achieve. So you just had every tech company in the entire country shift to remote work. So if you have someone that you have to expel into Latin America or India, as long as there's the technology infrastructure for them to keep working, they are just now going to work from wherever they get sent back to. And all of a sudden now you've eroded a high income tax base for your own company or for your own country. And like it's ridiculous and a scare tactic and just dumb. No, it's just dumb. Like,
no, it's interesting because like in the technology space, right? Like we are lucky enough that if you happen to be working on the technology space, and if you happen to be listening to the podcast, chances are you probably are. we have choice. Like we're not, like we're not like in a like physical industrial plant where we have to show up to make things and the plant is shutting down. Usually for, I mean, of course, the tech industry has been impacted by what's going on with the world, but not to the degree that it has impacted other industries. And a lot of the I think that one of the requirements for the H-1Bs are like, it's interesting because like sometimes you get to read like, oh, it's America first, right? The thing is that like almost like thinking that to apply to an H-1B, you don't need to show that, like one of the requirements is to show that you tried to hire American workers first and you did not find anyone qualified enough to actually, fill your position. Yeah. Right. So a combination of those two things where it's like companies tried, and to top it off, not that just companies tried, but that it's not that there is a larger pool of resources from COVID-19 because people are still there in the tech industry are still employed. This really is detrimental to like tech companies. They cannot process an H-1B. Actually, within Expedia Group, we're like trying to figure out what we're going to do because we did have a lot of these in transit, and now we're trying to scramble, trying to figure out what we're going to do. But yeah, it is something that I think does not solve anything, make things worse, and it doesn't. It's a very political argument that sounds well for a particular base, and that's it. Like
I mean, this is brought to you by the same folks that brought you detention camps. There's like COVID's being used as a smokescreen for like a identity politic issue in the 2020 election. But like when you look at, I just pulled up like a table of like H-1B petitions filed last year by industry. So 231,000 of those positions were computer related. The next up is only 28,000 architecture, engineering, and surveying. Then you have education, then you have health and life sciences, mathematics. All of these jobs, to a certain extent, with the exception of education and life sciences, where you probably need to be working in a lab, you probably need to be working in education, where honestly the talent is scarce, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not being able to bring in international professors that teach us and like help us get smarter. Every other field in the top 10 is an entirely portable field that's going to leave the country with the income stream and never come back. Like, but it will play well in a certain political base in the 2020 election. So we're making all sorts of like long-term, like decisions that have long-term impact for like short-term political sort of talking points. And that's, it's awful.
No, it's lose-lose. And I feel for the people that I know that I work with that are going to be impacted or could potentially be impacted by this. So it's I don't get it.
I mean, it
is sad. And to bring in to start rounding off, a lot of this is essentially the reason why we wanted to get to this part is that that these are sort of like related. The next two topics are related, and it's essentially the role of tech in our current sort of like I guess our current times. So the next one that we have essentially for the Charles Spring green cards, I think we're in agreement that was dumb. And we listed many reasons. The second one is interesting as well, that where IBM will not do facial recognition anymore.
Is that so? My whole thing with this, isn't this a solve from a technology perspective? From a technology perspective,
it's very much not, as far as I understand. So I think the challenge with facial recognition technologies as it exists is that it over indexes and produces false positives on an alarming level for people that don't fit a certain demographic profile. So it's
okay. Let me rephrase the statement then.
Okay. Yeah.
Isn't this a solved problem for the use cases that the people we're talking about really wanted to solve anyways?
What use cases are those?
Yeah.
When you think of police identifying people, surveillance, those kinds of things.
No, the tech is terrible. I mean, like that's the challenge is like it's.
I didn't say it, but that's my point is that to make those people happy, it doesn't have to be very accurate.
No, and I think, and actually, I was reading about that.
I think that's an assumption, but I think that, I mean, the main thing, what I think is the highlight in the article is that there are companies out there that are kind of starting to cut work with certain entities where these technologies, which can easily be abused from an ethical standpoint. Mm-hmm. And there are other companies that are kind of sticking to these contracts and these relationships with tech that can be, essentially easily abused. I think that talking about whether, I think I agree with Cedric that facial recognition is not a solved problem. Image processing, it's not where it needs to be to be able to say this is exactly who this person is, unless I'm trained on that exact person.
That's my point. Right? That's it. That's my exact point, though, is that it doesn't have to be that accurate.
No, I agree with. In this particular case, I agree with Michael.
To solve the problem is think of the military or the police departments trying to pull somebody out of a crowd. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to pick out. You don't have to be exactly right. You give me 10 guys out of a crowd of 100. That's good enough.
Well,
I would argue that is probably good enough.
No, and I was reading about it because like one of the interesting parts, and maybe I'll put her in the show notes. There was an episode on like NPR where they went through. Apparently, or it was the New York Times, where there was one person who did this essentially facial recognition by taking open source facial recognition software, plugging it to Facebook and Twitter feeds, which are public, and then Instagram, and suddenly. Police could they close like cold cases that were 20 years old.
Yeah.
They managed to close one because somebody took a selfie. And again, this is interesting because somebody took a selfie in a gym. The person that they were looking at were not in the selfie, but was essentially working out on the back of the machines, the exercise. So it was not the subject of the selfie, but it was enough of a lead for the police to be able to submit a warrant to the or a summons for information to the gym, and they actually find out the person that they were looking for.
It's a similar case with DNA analysis. So you see cold cases being solved now where the person that is the person that committed the crime, they have a DNA cataloged or whatever, but a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, somebody else was close enough. Theirs is categorized, and then you can it's enough to start the investigation, to have the conversations to get you to the point. And that's my point with facial recognition is all you need to do is get you close enough.
It doesn't have to be like
it. I'm sorry, please go ahead. But I want to weigh in after that.
No, it was just that yes, it goes from like as imperfect as it is 100 times more powerful than not having it. Like that, I think that's
and with power comes great responsibility. And I think, in light of everything else that's happening in this country right now, what concerns me about the impact of facial recognition is that we're dealing with disproportionate and often biased and incorrect policing. So if you have technology like this, what this is likely to do, especially when that technology can't even identify a picture of Oprah, like one of the most visible, publicly known faces in the world, who also happens to be a black face, if it can't even do that, what it's going to do is even further disproportionately over police specific communities in which the technology is really terrible.
I want to be clear. And when I say that it's a solved problem, I don't mean that it got it right. And I don't mean that the ethical is a completely separate conversation. What I am saying is that if you take
cat is out of the
policing techniques, current intelligent techniques, and apply the facial recognition that we have today, it does what they would want.
Well, but that's I would say it's a false equivalency to say that is the same as a DNA situation. So DNA, for the purposes of criminal investigation, is a solved problem, in my opinion, because the probabilistic likelihood of a false positive match is like infinitesimally small.
Oh
right?
yeah, no.
And for you can use that to prove a case. Like empirically, you can improve a case with DNA evidence. All you can do is generate suspicion under the case of facial recognition, and that can be used to oppress. and has been used to
Agreed.
oppress and is currently being used to oppress. And so like, if we were to get facial recognition to 100% accuracy, that we would be having a totally different conversation. But given the fact that it is not an unsolved problem, it is producing more problems than it is solving right now.
But that's my concern with that's my concern with when so I say it's a solved problem, meaning that it does what I believe those agencies are looking for today. The problem, though, is exactly what you bring up, which is that while it's considered it's good enough that we know they're using it, right?
It's biased.
Exactly. We know that these agencies are using this technology.
Yeah.
They view it as a solved problem because they don't, like I said, they're using it, right?
Mm-hmm. But how many people?
And it's bringing result.
How many people get wrongfully convicted in this country right now? Like, I mean, like it depends on like who it is that you're measuring, and what problems it is that you're solving. Like to me, like no facial recognition at all, and some crimes going unsolved is a better outcome than an innocent person going to jail for the rest of their life because there was enough of a preponderance of evidence based on like leads that were generated from flawed facial recognition to put them in court, especially if they're in front of a jury trial with a bias.
No, but so there's a couple of things, right? Like the first one is the argument that facial recognition should not. It's I don't think it's being used as a jury or judgment tool, right? Like it's used for finding like even on the cases where facial recognition was used from that particular episode, it was to get more evidence and then figure out, yes, this is the person that we're looking for. Now let's bring it to court, right?
Yeah.
So there's but the second part is the cat is out of the bag. So there's open source library for facial recognitions. There's tons of photos because people happen to be very narcissistic. So there's already a free form database of everybody's like stuff. We are going into it. We have video now. So the thing is like to say that it should not be done is it's shipped, right? Like that. It's not possible to put that cat back in the bag. The algorithms are out there because it's open sourced.
I can make source, but you can. There's all sorts of policing tactics. We just outlawed chokeholds in certain municipalities. Like you can regulate against the usage of this technology.
That's different than stopping the research.
Yeah,
saying you shouldn't use the research for X, Y, and Z is different from not doing it in the first place. But I would argue that they should continue doing the research.
But
legislate against it.
The argument that is being made is like IBM should actually make facial recognition better to avoid the bias that is definitely going to be used. Because I don't think that there's going to be even though it's very novel, I don't think there's going to be legislation happening anytime soon. Because the only way that legislation happens is when people start burning down police. And the thing is that to say that facial recognition generated into a death of somebody who was suspicious is too big of a leap for most people to follow.
All right, but do you mind if I make that leap? So we're not talking about death, but we are talking about incarceration in this case. So how many criminal court cases ended plea bargains in this country versus actually going to trial?
Too many.
Over 50%. More cases, more criminal cases, especially criminal cases that involve poor people as defendants, involve African Americans as defendants in plea bargains. So if you have enough evidence through facial recognition to bring someone into an interrogation room, they will not have the financial resources to get a reasonable lawyer more often than not. They will not be well informed enough to know what their rights are, and they will plea in the case of their own innocence more often than they will risk going to trial and getting punished more.
Stopping the research doesn't solve the problem. Stopping the research doesn't solve the problem.
But stopping the research can be a moral effort, right? Like there was all sorts of research that was happening in times in our history. I'm not going to call out like Nazi Germany specifically, but there was all sorts of scientific research that was happening at that time that shouldn't have taken place. Like rocket science advanced, but it also led to rockets being dropped on England. And as technologists, we have a social responsibility to stop and think about how the research and the technology that we're developing is being used and whether that is currently being used for more harm than good. There's also the factor, in my opinion, that we could be at a point where we are in an AI winter for facial recognition. Like, we've taken the technology as far as we can until we make some major like innovation leap on the processing side, where like that research needs to be paused because they can only make incremental progress on it until we get that big leap. And then maybe that research is developed again and maybe we do get to a point of 100% accuracy. But the question is also like, in the hands of whom, right? Like, I would not necessarily want like to not be impossible to, I would not want to live in a society where it's impossible for me to disappear, right? Because if I'm in a fascist government, if you took facial recognition and applied it in a time of Nazi Germany, think about the ethical and societal implications of that. And in many respects, like around the world, there maybe not the United States, although I will put the United States in the like trending toward fascism camp, but like Latin American countries would have access to this technology. Like you would have dictators, you would have like Putin would have access to this technology.
Don't we know that China already does this?
China already does this.
Yeah, China already does this.
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael that it really is the application, but the research leads to the applications, right?
Right.
And there, the historical use case for this is kind of ironic because it comes from IBM giving punch cards to the Nazis to help facilitate the Holocaust. I mean, the application of the research and the technology and companies willing to contract with those parties does have implications. And I think that is a very solid statement. And we need to be paying attention to the companies that are taking responsibility for those implications and the ones that are not.
But I guess to be honest,
like, I don't even think IBM's probably the company to be worrying about in this space, which is
maybe not
the other reason. It's like,
well, but someone has to set a trend, right? Like, there was the New York government and the San Francisco government were the first people that announced like some form of mandated social distancing, which made it safer for Chicago to announce the same thing. And so maybe this is like the tipping point that we might need for Amazon employees, for Google employees to start more aggressively questioning the use of this. And I think, Freddie, to your point, like, you're right. There's no way that you can put the genie back in the bottle, but as a technologist, you can do your part to stop making genies that you're afraid. Like, I mean, how many members of the Manhattan Project regret the fact that they helped build the nuclear bomb? Right? Like,
that's a mix.
Really?
So no. The thing that happens is that okay. So to clarify, right? Like, yes, when who was it? Oppenheimer was discovered split the atom, right? Like, there were applications for everything. If anything, because of their responsibility, there were only 2 nuclear warheads that ever been explored on this world. Of course, the United States did it. That's another story for another day. But there were like, and yes, there is an argument for scientists to stop publishing the research, right? The thing is, though, that for nuclear proliferation, it is one of those where either you have it or you don't. Like, in this particular case, it's like you actually have something that works, might not be perfect, but it's already out. Like there is no way to say, forget about what you learn on how to do facial recognition. Machine learning makes it, fairly straightforward to rediscover if somebody wants to rediscover it, right? So and we cannot control machine learning either. Like, that is what's powering a lot of it, right?
Yeah. But I mean, like, so go ahead. Sorry.
The second part is that you are right in the sense that if we go to a tribunal system where we say this AI on this picture frame detected you as a person, and we're just going to go with that, and then you are guilty of a charge. I think that while that is definitely probable, I think we are way far away from our legal system to be able to allow things like that. Right now, even if you have a traffic ticket, they would not allow your GPS tracking to say like, look, I wasn't above the speed, right? Like, and even they discount, like, you know, even if an officer, you know, takes your measurement of like how fast you were going, there's actually like things about like, was the machine calibrated the day that it was taken? Do we have records of that? Like, there is all this process to prevent for a particular technology to be jury and executor in the court of law here. So
in traffic court, I would not make the same claim of criminal court. I would not make the same claim of like the way that policing works in Inglewood or Chatham here in Chicago. Like I
think that even like
it's a lot more
photographic
subjective.
Evidence, like because what it will come down to, right? It will be somebody like at the end of the day, facial recognition just allows you to identify a particular frame on a particular video that says it's you.
Yeah. And then what happens?
That is. Let's be clear. It doesn't allow you to identify that it was you.
Someone like you.
Been you. Right.
And that's so.
Freddie, that's exactly where Cedric's going with this, is the fact that it might be you. You have you being a poor person from that's the wrong race, aka not white, and can't afford legal decent representation. That's enough to scare you into pleading into going to prison, even though you.
Yeah. I mean, no one's going to be like, well, actually, you know what? Like, you only
and it never
use,
gets
like,
in front of a jury.
Like,
it never goes through that process you're describing.
Yeah, and that's I guess that's the point, is that it's enough pseudoscience, just like lie detector tests were pseudoscience, and those were used to disproportionately scare people into like false admissions of guilt.
Confessions,
like this, false confessions. Like this can be used for the same thing. You put, an 18-year-old, young guy from like the south side of Chicago in front of like, hey, we have a photograph of you doing this. They're not going to be sitting there thinking about, well, how many perceptrons did you end up using for that? Like how many?
But it's you get your alibi, right? Like that's the part I don't like. Somebody can take a picture on their phone right now and submit it as evidence. Nothing has changed.
That assumes you have one.
That's if you have an alibi,
right?
Like,
but that's let's like yourselves. So think of you got think of the typical person that's being.
Can you
targeted
just say
by
that's not me?
No, that's not
why
good
not?
That's not because what would a criminal say?
It's innocent until proven guilty, right?
No. I wish
a picture in front of a jury is enough to say it's. Guilty.
And that's the other challenge. Is
pictures, they threw them out.
I guess traffic court, again, very different from criminal court, very different from like being like, if you have a prior record, a prior history of an arrest, and like 10 years later, like once you're out of prison, once you're out of that arrest, once you're cleared, all of a sudden that's on your record. Now the fact that like facial recognition has identified you as like a black face that is in a bucket of 100 other black faces means that you're less likely to engage in fighting something because you lost the first time, and there's already a cloud over you from like a past arrest. And
so like the knuckle strike
and
laws and
it's
all
not
that
like
kind of stuff.
It's not like you're educated necessarily on like the false positive rates of machine learning systems. Right. And you're also faced with, let's talk about alibis for a second. Because of the over-policing in a lot of these communities, a lot of those communities have been conditioned under no circumstances to talk to the police. So who are you going to get in your community to even validate your alibi at that point?
Okay, but I think we're conflating.
This is why I go back to stopping the research isn't going to solve this problem. It's legislating the use of it in the first place.
I think
you got to slow down the research to a certain extent in order to let legislation actually come into effect. Like we could, I mean, and effectively, like, so the IBM team, maybe they're at the cutting edge of facial recognition. I don't know, right? But there's going to be an outcome if they move forward their research. They're either going to hit a breakthrough or they're not. They're going to be in like the number three player of the space, or they're going to do something like super revolutionary that puts them up into the number one. So if they stay number three, if they're not introducing any new incremental innovation in facial recognition, then there's no point to them doing the research in the first place because they're not moving the needle forward. If they do move the needle forward, then all of a sudden you've created a bigger genie before we as a society have an understanding of how to use this technology responsibly and put it in context. There's no chance we're getting this legislation in within the next 6 months.
Well, compare it to copyright with software. I mean, we just don't have especially back when open source was just beginning to deal with copyright in software.
But that's kind of how
and we still are kind of grappling with that with Oracle and Google.
Unfortunately, that's how our legislation process works, is the fact that it isn't until it's actually challenged that anybody does anything.
That's exactly right. You have to bring it to court and litigate it in order to get a ruling on the books and establish precedent, which requires money, which requires companies willing to go to court, which requires companies to have the moral judgment to begin with to fight for specific things. So that's why I want to bring it back to the companies making the decision. We're not contracting, or at least saying this is where we stand morally on a piece of technology as the start to get to that point. Because if you don't have that, you're not even in the race. You're not even establishing precedent. You're not pushing these things legally.
Which means we never solve the problem legislatively.
We may not, but it starts with the conscience.
It starts with awareness and it starts with conscience.
Here's where my problem is in stopping the research. It's
China will get it.
All those
H1B, all those H1B that couldn't come here.
No, Freddie, let's use your person in the back of the gym example, right? Just because that was how they started the process doesn't mean that's the piece of evidence that ever needs to see the light of day.
Yeah, of course.
It doesn't going to stop these people from, without legislation, it doesn't stop them from using this tool. As bad as it is, they're still going to use it.
Yeah.
The only way to prevent that is by legislating it that you cannot use this, period. It's at the chokehold level. And that's what I would advocate for, not stopping research.
But maybe part of the issue is that there's two branches of research, right? So there's the accuracy branch of research, where if you invest more clock cycles in something, maybe you end up with a better facial recognition match. But then there's also the scaling aspect of it. How many images can you match a second? How quickly can you slurp up all social media that's ever been published to the web and do a transactional match against someone that's standing right in front of you? And that research,
it was a startup.
I mean, there's the startup that does the really, really creepy social media passing, but they're also
the actual government, the NSA and stuff.
And the false positive rate on that is ridiculous. It's interesting. Every journalist that's ever interviewed that one dude with the ponytail has been of a specific demographic representation. But if you try to do the same sort of thing again with Oprah, it can't identify Oprah. It cannot identify.
But that makes the argument for keep the research going.
Well, it doesn't, because I think that unless we anticipate that we're going to get from a 70% breakthrough to 100% breakthrough overnight, it's actually far more dangerous to get to an 80% if it means that you're generating, in fact, more false positives than accurate.
I'm with Freddie on this one. If you stop the research in the U.S., it's going to happen elsewhere.
Sure. Yeah, it will. But a police force in the United States would have a really, really hard political time contracting with a firm in China.
Are you kidding me?
To adopt facial recognition tech? We just expelled Huawei.
As long as you can do anonymous tips. This can be cut so many ways, right?
If the evidence actually never sees the light of them, sure. No, I'd see no political issues there.
Yeah,
you don't see a political issue. All right, wait.
Somebody will call a phone this anonymous.
Meaning they'll do it. I'm not saying that they should. I'm saying that
that will happen.
But let's think about what we're saying here for a second. So we're saying that it would not be it would be okay, or it would be politically acceptable for a major police department to start out shipping massive collections of, let's say, every single toll booth pass to a foreign government for the purpose of improving their image recognition technology. They would be sharing surveillance on the 30,000 cameras that we have here in Chicago, posted like all over the city. That they would be shipping that to a foreign government.
I don't think they can do that.
That's a foreign government.
No, but that's Cedric's point. That's Cedric's point. It would be in the news.
So and the problem is that these algorithms are.
I mean, the police already do that kind of thing already. Let's be clear about this.
To foreign governments?
No, I'm not saying governments. I'm saying foreign companies.
Sure, for foreign companies, but the difference in facial recognition, as I understand it, is it's actually about the data centralization as much as it is the algorithm. Right. So like there's going to be very little that you would be able to do to like take the Alibaba cloud facial recognition without being able to create like a trained and untrained data set to produce like a higher yield of classifications. And so like you would to a certain extent have to ship that training set.
The world's trained data set, Facebook and Instagram. Like that, I don't think that we need that to train.
But who's
like that? So that is not the point. The point will be like, can they use like footage from what they have to identify somebody who's on that particular? That might be a problem. But I don't think they need like to achieve the same results. I think they just need to go to the public, to whatever is considered public domain already.
So who's then training that model? Like, are you talking about this is an untrained model from the sense that it's like black box, and we're going to take a model that worked for a bunch of people of
Facebook bought a company called Face.com. Facebook has this. This is what they do behind this.
Yeah.
Like this,
sure.
Facebook already does this. They already have models. The genie's out of the bottle here.
Yeah,
the genie is out of the bottle, but we don't need to make a bigger genie. I think that this is a thing for us to champion, that IBM is getting out of the facial recognition game. It's at least some pool of engineers that will be working on something better for the world than what facial recognition is currently providing. And like maybe that tips the scales, and maybe people that work at Facebook go work at IBM. Maybe this gives like Facebook engineers enough courage, like they did with just recently with the fact-checking thing on Donald Trump's Facebook account. This could give Facebook engineers enough cover to nullify this program within Facebook. It's a step, but like we can't just sit around. Like I feel like it's irresponsible for us to sit around and say like, oh no, well this is just a drop in the bucket for IBM. There's all these other big behemoth companies out there, so what IBM is doing is zero impact. It's not. Like just like the Minnesota Police Department actually championing a divest and invest sort of approach to their own policing infrastructure made it safer for Los Angeles to do that. We'll now make it safer, hopefully, for our mayor to do that at some point. It has to start somewhere, and like a big name like IBM is like that's impactful. I'm a fan of what they're doing.
Again, I don't think that if we're talking about nuclear type, and I think that the disconnect is what we qualify as the impact, right? Yeah. Like we're saying that we have facial recognition that is out in the public, or with 80% success rate. Let's call it that way.
Sure.
And to advance that to 100%, and I think that is the hang up. What I think is like, if it was between 20% and 100%, or like 20% to 80%, I'll say maybe there's a chance.
Right.
I don't think the genie is that much bigger. Once you get to 80, it's like, like whatever it is that it was going to be accomplished with 80% it was ill-gotten, or like that we don't agree with, will be accomplished with either 100% or 80% or even 60%.
But I guess like, so let's take speaker.
So Cedric.
Yeah. Okay.
Would 97.35% be good enough?
I don't think that's what most researchers are focused on right now. I think they're focused on scale. And,
so the algorithm that Facebook uses is face, and their claimed accuracy rate is 97.35%. It's based on that face.com acquisition.
97.3% of what? Like, what is their
accuracy?
what is their of what though? Like, are we talking about a fuzzy image from like a security
Facebook
camera? 7-Eleven?
Yeah,
Right, that's very different.
images.
It's very different.
The data matters. The data.
I have a 13 megapixel camera and a light that I'm putting directly in front of my face. That's very different from like surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven across the street, or like a Ring like video doorbell that police are now actively encouraging, whole community associations to federate to police departments. That's very, very different. And I think the problem is that on that subject of like mass surveillance level face detection, the game is scale. There's just like a massive amount of data, like more data, I think, than what exists on like opt-in, like social media, Instagram posts. To analyze, and there's not enough compute power to analyze it. So a lot of research, to the best of my understanding, on facial recognition is being done on a matter of scale. But what that means in terms of its societal implications is if we find ourselves in a situation where we have reprehensible social policy, like the policies that are in place, what happens, like let's tie this issue to the last issue. What happens if every single H-1B worker loses their ability to remain a legal immigrant while at the same time they cannot get home? That is a situation that I'm facing right now with my own fiance who's from Colombia. What happens then if facial technology is being used to hunt down those individuals and put them in detention camps? Like, I would say like 2 years ago, like that wasn't like, that's like science fiction, but we're pretty damn close to that right now.
It will happen, like if that. So Cedric, the argument is that if the government wills it, right?
Yeah, I'm not really relying on the government's will.
But that's what I mean. Like again, it's a matter of impact, right? Like if the government wills it right now, like decided today, I am going with the open source one.
Sure.
And I am going to run and train it through all this thing.
Yeah,
it will happen. We
don't have the scale to do that right now.
I think the government does.
The NSA, no, I mean, the government doesn't. The government does not have the scale to identify every inbound.
Like Amazon, IBM, and Microsoft to provide it for them.
Yeah.
Which we'll gladly do.
Some of them will, but I mean, that's hopefully that becomes a trend.
It sounds like not.
Yeah. I mean, so IBM, they're not the leader in facial recognition, but if Google jumps in and says like, hey, actually, we're going to opt out of this as well. AWS has already agreed to stop working with ICE in certain cases. Then we could get to a point where like the NSA is actually going to have to like develop their own systems to support all of this. And they're going to have to basically expose the fact that they're doing this independently as a government on their own population. And I think that the moral outcry from that at that point is going to be substantial enough that there will be pushback, just like there's been pushback at the local level on a number of other social policy abuses.
No, okay. So the argument that you're making right now is that it's not the accuracy, it's just the cost.
It's the cost, it's the scale.
It's which turns to cost, right?
Well, sort of. Like there's the factor of like ingest, right? And that's not limited solely by just like how many clock cycles can I throw at the problem. Like you have network effects on being able to match image to image. So you need a certain degree of centralization, I think, to be able to pull these profiles together.
But then you can distribute that, right? Like the same.
Sort of. I think there's sort of.
Can we say that it's hard but not impossible to solve that?
It's hard but not impossible. But to the best of my understanding, a lot of these recognition algorithms are memory bound. It's expensive, but it's also memory bound, and there's like silicon limits of being able to support that without.
You also assume that it's a blind facial recognition match
instead of targeted to like
right, exactly, targeting geos and other things. Exactly.
This is 25.
This isn't just random feed in, run it against the model of all of America. Like that's not a
But
that doesn't scale, right? That's
right. But like, so I guess like, so the 1984 scenario in my mind is police department pulling up we're there. Like we're there in like very surprising and scary ways.
How are you?
But like, but that's very different from like, okay, police person like pulling up a Facebook image of a person and having enough real-time surveillance data and analysis to be like, this person is on this block this second. Not that where this person was at a gym 3 weeks ago, but like this is where they are right now. That requires scale, and that requires additional research to get to that level of latency. So
we should ask what can we agree that China did this already?
I don't think you need to get that accurate with the timing. I think like.
I mean,
that's research, which I think brings it back to the point. It's I don't think it's about stopping it. You almost can't stop things like this from happening, but you can slow it down.
You can slow it.
You can start building the ethics around it.
Yeah.
Before the technology gets so far ahead of the ethics.
Yeah.
The genie really is so far ahead, we're not even sure what the hell we're doing.
I mean, I think the problem is that like the technology has the capacity of getting so far ahead of legislation. Like the story of the last 100 years.
That's the same. Is that the same story? Like just like CRISPR and moratorium on human DNA experiments? I guess that's the same.
Yeah. Right? No, I mean, like there's a very
parallel.
I feel like the last 100 years of human history from a technology lens have been basically like massive innovations, and then us understanding the moral implications of those innovations, and then more massive innovations, and then us understanding the moral implications. You would take like things like social media and its impact on mental health. We're just now starting to understand that. But the problem is that like in the middle of that period where we have massive innovation, but we don't yet understand the implications and moral hazards associated with it, the faster the innovation moves, the greater the potential.
I disagree with that as being applicable to scenario, because we do understand the implications, because we are already banning it in places. Major cities are already banning facial recognition technology.
Yeah,
that implies that we can already make this decision. We understand the implications.
Or at least we understand that it's risky.
But we've been doing it for over 20 years, and now it's getting banned.
But also, like, we understand the moral. We understand the moral implications just now of our capabilities now, and that is not a universal.
We didn't have the capabilities to do the kinds of mass things that we've been talking about the past.
I agree with that.
The past 2 or 3 years. So
sure.
I would argue that this is actually a really good example of legislation having the potential of doing the right thing.
At the local level, but like it's sort of like the luck of the draw whether you're in like a more socially conscious area or you're in Alabama, right? And I think no offense to any listeners in Alabama, but like I mean like I think that's part of the challenge, is that awareness is not yet equally distributed. And it's also a reactive measure to the capabilities that we have today or the capabilities that we had 3 years ago. But if we start piling onto that the capabilities of tomorrow, when we're still catching up on the harm of the capabilities that we have today, with something like facial recognition specifically.
I mean, there's already been a bill introduced in the federal level.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to pass?
In this current economic...
Has any bill passed? Like from Democrats?
The one that was suspending a while.
The only thing they do is approve judges these days.
Right. But I mean, that's I agree.
I check some people
of the 500 or so like congressional representatives that we have. I should really know that count exactly. Like, a couple Congress people are taking up this issue. Do you think that's actually going to pass through the gauntlet of the Senate right now, and the Senate's like the Senate pro temp's leadership? Like it's going to raise some awareness, but like we're talking at least a midterm election and a presidential election before we could actually see legislation pass through that changes this for the United States.
I mean, and that is what legislation is like. It's slow, right? Like,
so how many? What if like a friend of yours ends up in jail in the meantime because they were falsely accused based on like inaccurate facial recognition? Or let's say that let's do it the other way. Let's say that there was suspicion of someone, right? And that like was not driven off of facial recognition, but facial recognition was enough to like locate them in real time before the detectives had an opportunity to do real detective work. And then they're placing that person in an interrogation room, driving them toward a plea bargain at a faster pace. Like if policing is broken, we should not be putting these tools in front of police departments right now, period. And that's where like most of this stuff is happening. Like
and that's my big problem with stopping the research, is the fact that there is a tool out there, and without legislating saying that you can't use it, they're stuck with it. They are going to use what they have, which is fundamentally broken. It's not good enough.
Yeah, but that is not, they do not have a tool to tell like a police officer where Cedric is right now. They don't have a tool to do that.
They know where Cedric was.
Actually, they do. It's their cell phone. They know exactly where it's their cell phone. They get a subpoena and find that out. Like that's a solvable problem. That has nothing to do with facial recognition.
They don't know they know what cell tower I'm pinging to. They may know like the general vicinity, but they don't know that I'm on the corner of Washington. No, they can't. No, they can't. Like that's GPS.
That's the last mile problem. Yeah, I get that, but
there's like you can do triangulation to place me in a park, but you can't place me at the intersection of like Washington and Randolph yet. You can with cameras,
but
you fully can with cameras, but you don't have the capacity to.
Like, why would I need you? Why would I need pinpoint? Unless I'm physically looking to pick you up.
Yeah, and that is a thing that happens, right? Like police are hunting for suspects all the time, but the problem is that like if their lens on identifying the suspect
is
trying to identify I guess what I'm saying is like we need some like. So traffic cameras is another example. We'll go back to the traffic example because it's just a little bit less
obvious,
sort of emotional. So like certain laws and certain procedures were put in place for a different time period when it was impossible to 100% of the time enforce certain rules. So like all five of us, I'm sure, have by accident rolled a stop sign at some point in our driving careers. I mean, by accident, like, yeah, like, I mean, or like slow.
If I have a lie detector right now,
in front of the cop and he pulled me over, so I can actually say that.
Yeah, but like now imagine that that's applied to every single like micro traffic violation that you've ever entered. Every time you've gone a mile over the speed limit, right? Like, let's say that we actually had the technical capability to do that, and you were punished every single time you looked the wrong way, didn't like wear a mask to go get the mail, didn't like went 56 miles an hour versus 55 miles an hour. If we had the technology to do that, that law of speed limits would be unsustainable, right? Like that law of speed limits we would have to change the law because we now have a much higher capacity to enforce that law than was ever intended at the time.
The idea is punishment rewards, right? Like if the idea was that if you only caught 1/10 of the people, that your punishment was in some measure that makes it so that it's undesirable for anyone to break that law.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're saying we caught 10 out of 10, then it should be, yes, the laws. I guess two things need to change. First, the punishment of the law needs to be changed, and the second one is
people's behavior would change.
I'm actually not following. I feel like if you're going to catch everybody and it's unbiased, everybody's car has said detection.
Right.
If you're a mile over, it's going to change the behavior. But
everybody's going to speed anymore.
I'm not understanding why that's bad, actually.
Okay, so that isn't bad because you're not sent to jail over going a mile over the speed limit, even if it's 100% enforced, and it is not bad because it is not biased.
Yes.
Now let's talk about criminal policing. Let's talk about the disproportionate usage of police in certain neighborhoods, in certain communities, and let's talk about the fact that the technology itself has a clear bias of false positives towards certain racial profiles. Now, all of a sudden, you have a capability of more comprehensively enforcing a law for one community, and simply by the lack of presence in police in other neighborhoods, simply by lack of attention from the police in other neighborhoods, simply by the fact that these algorithms are more accurate on people of a certain skin tone than others. Now, all of a sudden, like you've got an out of balance system.
But and the problem is that doesn't fix that problem.
If the research is focused on scale, it amplifies the problem. If the research is focused genuinely on accuracy, sure, it may stop the problem, but that's not the way that AI research historically has worked, right? You look at speech detection like 10 years ago. Like we hit an AI winter with Dragon Dictate, 95% accuracy, and it took 10 years to get to 99% accuracy. And that was because there were revolutionary changes in AI in terms of the compute capacity that led in the algorithms that we were able to do that were computationally impossible to do before that led to that innovation. Everything else, all other innovation in speech recognition that occurred until like Alexa and Siri and that generation was focused on scale. Like and like some failed research efforts that people knew, like you needed a new type of computer to get to this point. Like the next leap that we would have on facial recognition, I would probably say is going to be quantum computing, which is like 5, 10, 15 years away. And so at that point, all research is going to be focused on scale, is going to be focused on very, very specific applications, not generalized applications. And in the meantime, all you're doing is you're making more of it. You're making more widgets that produce a disproportionate harm to specific skin tones, to specific geographic areas, and to specific individuals. And I guess that's what I'm saying. And if you look at the article, IBM, they're also talking about stopping general purpose facial recognition. Right, so they're still working on specialized cases for facial recognition, but they're stopping like creating this widget that they know is flawed and they know is going to be flawed for a super long time. They've decided to make less of it, and I think that personally, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence on it. Like, I mean, it's. I think we're going in circles on the arguments. The argument is that any slowdown is good, especially, and then let's sort of slow down on the ability to scale this, because that's what we decided. Like, we decided that being more accurate facial recognition is great. We decided that the ability to have a super duper algorithm that can be applied at scale to everybody in the population allowed it to be sort of like monitored is bad, but I think that's bad in principle for regardless of what facial recognition is used for, right? Because there are other ways. We already have other ways that they can do that. Like Michael is right. We do have cell phones, but people are comfortable with the cell phones because they know that government usually does not actively monitor those unless there is a
I disagree with the reason we're comfortable with them. I'll send you a whole talk on that. It goes back to your risk versus reward thing. Very little risk of me getting arrested carrying this thing around, and the reward of me getting Facebooks and tweets and all kinds of other things.
Very little risk of
That's why they're burner phones, I guess. Yes, all right.
I very little risk of you carrying around, Michael, who lives in the suburbs. Like more risk of like an immigrant that was seeking asylum and is trying to escape being put in a detention case.
Yeah. And that's why they would carry a burner phone or something like that as opposed to an iPhone or that's why they use WhatsApp as opposed to Facebook Messenger.
So you're saying people can wear a different face?
I think maybe a safer way to frame this like sort of ethical question is: do we think as technologists, knowing what we know about technology, that mass surveillance is good?
No, I think we all agree on that. Like mass surveillance is not good, but
I think the question is how do we solve the problem?
Yeah, and I think the answer is I think the real answer is legislation. Because everything else will be either discovered or it's too right.
So I think yes, but I'm going to read a paragraph from the actual article that we've been talking about this whole time. IBM firmly opposes and will not condone any uses of facial recognition technology, including facial recognition technology offered by other vendors for mass surveillance, racial profiling, and violations of basic human rights and freedom, or any purpose which is not consistent with our values and principles of trust and transparency. We believe now is the time to begin a national dialogue on whether and how facial recognition technology should be employed by domestic law enforcement agencies.
Which I think I think that's, again, we agree on that.
Yeah, but I think that's the important part of this conversation. Again, them making a decision not to offer that product is the exact opposite of giving punch cards to the Nazis. I mean, that is
and it's
we're
also
not enabling this.
Yeah, and it also, you know what? It gains column inches, right? Like them putting out that statement without actually putting some weight behind it is the equivalent of just tweeting Black Lives Matter and like blacking out your Instagram feed. Which, like, what they're doing is they're saying, like, you know what? We're willing to take a real loss in this market because of our values, and that is like technology at its best, in my opinion.
So, and to be clear, like, when I talk about research, I'm viewing this from the academic perspective.
Yeah,
Big Blue does a truckload of purely academic research.
Yep,
and that's the area that I'm viewing that they should not stop.
This is a product that they stopped selling.
I agree that they should stop selling a product. Like I agree with. Like productizing this, it's Cedric, to your point, it's not ready for prime time. It's not ready for the scale that we're talking about. I agree with that. It's the academic aspect of this that
I worked at IBM for 6 years, and I can tell you a little bit about how research is conducted at IBM. So research is conducted by purists, right? Like they're developing Deep Blue and like all sorts of really cool things. But at some point, a salesperson in Armonk, New York, is going to say, like, great, how can we turn that into a product? How can we turn that into a cost center, right? And so, like, if you drive the research pipeline, eventually you will get overwritten by an executive that's looking to, like, correct their balance sheet and not look at they're not doing this research primarily out of altruism. They're doing this research to, like, for the marketing buzz of going to beat Ken Jennings in Jeopardy, right? And that like led to a whole marketing campaign around Watson. Right. So like, why do the research? Why invest? If you're a corporation, why invest the time in doing the research if you're also saying we're not going to introduce any products? Do that at a university. Like, do that. Yeah. At this time, and probably for the foreseeable future, at least the line of research that they're doing.
The argument, you can make the same argument for quantum computing. They're not going to have a product around quantum computing for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, they're not. But I think that if we started talking
about
the
they're heavily investing in it.
They are, but because the applications of that are more general purpose, in my opinion, than facial recognition. Like, you can use quantum computing for medical research. You can do quantum computing for financial technology, but you could do quantum computing to also achieve, to crack encryption, which is a little bit, that's obviously a little bit creepy. But you could also use quantum computing to say, like, hey, you know what? Like, I mean, this is like a Hulu series does. We could be like, hey, you know what? We think you're going to commit a crime like 3 years from now. Like, and all of a sudden you live in a Minority Report. And like, that's there's not actually, a thing that
there's actually a startup that is trying that, but for the record,
funny.
But the thing is, we're so far off from that being a reality that stopping the research on quantum computing today isn't necessary. If all of a sudden we started introducing quantum computing into the real market, and we saw the impact and abuses of that technology, then at that point, yes, I do think it's appropriate for IBM to cut down. And that's where they are in the life cycle of facial recognition and mass surveillance. All we're seeing is mostly harm. We're not seeing, I just don't think that mass surveillance, especially, in the hands of the current government, is going to yield good things for the world. And I would say the same thing of the Chinese government. I would say the same thing of a lot of Latin American, sort of like.
Yeah, I don't think anybody here disagrees with the idea that mass surveillance is going to end. Is going to end well.
What's the other market for facial recognition right now?
Ability to unlock phones, like security. There's like there are things. You can find me on Facebook. And really, it's a very shallow plus, but it is.
Yeah, but is that so? So they've stopped research in general purpose facial recognition. Unlocking phones is not general purpose facial recognition. Being able to take an infrared 300 or 248 point array of my face to be able to determine the topographical map of my face to determine whether I'm the person that owns the phone. It's a very different application from just like a general open source tool for saying, here's a pool of 500 images, show me all the images that match this face. Right? Like that's general purpose application. Everything else, like the specialized application, I don't think they're saying they're going to stop doing that, but they're just going to stop.
I guess if that's your classification of general purpose, and that's the thing, like general purpose, it's without having context is very hard for me to understand what do you mean by general purpose, right? Like,
I think general purpose is like a black box algorithm.
If it's a search, like I want you to search for this, then maybe if it was like facial searches, then that is a more concrete, boxed in problem. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But
then I cannot get auto tag on Facebook, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, that's.
Yeah.
But I mean, like there could be other things. Like I can see facial recognition being used, for example, to understand moods and say, like, once you get this assistants that are evolving, they first hear you, now they're gonna start seeing you, and they see like you're angry or sad, or you can even use telemedicine. There is a big range of where this could be used.
I mean, I don't.
If you're talking about you're talking about just searching about. I have this person. I want you to tell me where it is.
Yeah.
And if you box the problem as that, then I might be agreeing with you. Like, okay.
Well,
fine.
and I guess, so like, I don't work at IBM and I don't work in the marketing department anymore, but so I don't know what they classify as general purpose or not, but every use case that you described that wasn't mass surveillance is, to me, a specialized use case. Facial recognition is recognizing faces, right? And that is at its heart a search problem. And that is the general purpose application in which they're saying they're going to stop doing that. Everything else, like mood tracking is a very specialized system. You're going to be working with totally different primitives. You're going to be working with different data volumes than you would for facial recognition. That's
I think they have underpinnings that are probably around the same. Like recognizing something smiling might even involve the same 248 points. Plus understanding what smiling looks like in a human.
So but that's not recognition. That's analysis, in my opinion. Right, like I can build a corpus of an output.
We're splitting hairs now, right? Yes, in that particular case, again, I'm just putting a frame. If what we call general purpose is searching, which is an easy way to define, then I agree. We shouldn't do that because that enables. Now the problem is like if general facial recognition means more than that, then it's like it's an iffy. For me, it's an iffy proposition to say don't research any of it. Versus don't research finding a face on a 1,000 videos. Yeah.
I mean, if you like the body of the article talks specifically about the scope of facial recognition, and it also talks about a number of empirical studies that have indicated bias on those facial recognition technologies. They specifically cite recognition, which is like face-to-face matching in real time. Or over a large corpus of data. So I think like they've scoped it, and like Clearview AI, which is like the creepy company with all the social media posts that everyone's deleted. That's like they're specifically citing that. Yeah. Like maybe a better headline is we will stop doing creepy facial recognition rather than general purpose. But yeah.
I'm convinced.
Thank you for entertaining this conversation for so long. I know it's super late, and
I think we're probably at the end of our 2-hour and change episode. But see that this happens when we bring Cedric in, is we can't stop talking, which is great. But I think that we'll leave it for now. And there was another topic that we wanted to address, but we might actually do another
push
episode.
that to next time. We may have to split this episode into 2 parts, or we'll see what we do.
We'll see what we do.
The happy part and the sad part.
No. I think we go to the same place, which is great. And sometimes discovering those takes time, but that's what makes this podcast interesting. Is the discussion, right?
It's an important conversation to have.
Yeah,
it's arguably one of the most important conversations.
We can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But I think in this case we're lining up. So with that, I think that this is it for this episode. I wanted to remind our listeners. So a couple of things before we take off. The first one is that there is a video RSS feed for Java OffHeap. So you can, or a YouTube channel if that's how you like to receive it. So if you actually want to look at us instead of just listen to us, definitely go in and subscribe to the video feeds. We also have a couple of other shows, right? Like Bob and I do Java Pop House, which is less political than this, more technical, and then less punditry. Let's put it that way. There's also Stacked, the Stacked podcast that Josh and Keto and Ian and Daniel Hinojosa do together, which is more full stack. So there is a depth into that. Bob and Josh also record Breaking Into Open Source, which is, if you're ever interested in contributing to open source, that's where you want to subscribe and start listening to them. So please subscribe to all of them. If you happen to listen to this podcast and you definitely like it, you can always, give us a thumbs up or 5 stars. Or if you are so kind, you can buy us a beer. So that way, we can have a beer in isolation. And lastly, don't subscribe to keep subscribing to our podcast and recommend it to your friends. All right. That's what I have. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was fun. All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.
Follow us on Twitter at OffHeap.
Yes. Also watch 13th.
All right. Get it. Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. No, please. Is Freddie signing off?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.